Okay, why don't we get started? I want to welcome everybody to what I think will be a fascinating talk. We're very fortunate to have an incredible speaker with us today, who I will introduce very shortly. First, we'll start off with a U of T land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. The Temerty Center for Artificial Intelligence Research and Education in Medicine, or T-CAIREM, at the University of Toronto has been made possible by the generous donation of the Temerty family. T-CAIREM is an interdepartmental center that serves as a focal point for collaboration among healthcare providers, trainees, researchers, computer scientists, engineers, and industry. Very, very multidisciplinary. Our goal is very simple. It's to transform health through artificial intelligence research and education. Just a quick mention that this event is CPD accredited. To obtain your CPD credit, please complete the evaluation form that we will email to all attendees following this event. And don't forget to provide your name and email address on the evaluation form. Also, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions for Dr. Lee. We'll ask him to address these questions during the discussion portion of this webinar. This event is also being live tweeted, so please follow along using the hashtag Temerty Talks. So let's introduce Dr. Peter Lee. Dr. Lee is Corporate Vice President, Research and Incubations at Microsoft. He leads Microsoft research across its 9 laboratories around the world. He also oversees several incubation teams for new research-powered lines of business, the largest of which today is Microsoft's growing healthcare and life sciences effort. Dr. Lee has extensive experience in managing fundamental research to commercial impact in a range of areas, spanning artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and many more. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you for the presentation.
Thank you, Mohammed, and it's really quite an honor to be asked to speak here. And as you know, I've been serving on the advisory board for T-CAIREM, and it's been great just to see its growth and its impact growing all the time. So, so thank you again for the honor. I'll go ahead and share. I do have some slides, and so I will share my screen here. And so what I wanted to talk about is described in the title, the emergence of general AI for healthcare and medicine. And you might guess, of course, since I'm from Microsoft, that a big part of that is really about the general cognitive capabilities that are emerging in large language models. And one, of course, that has sort of captured the zeitgeist, and I suspect many of you have used, is in Chat-GPT from OpenAI. And indeed, I will be talking about the technology from OpenAI with support from Microsoft here, but not about Chat-GPT, but about a more powerful model, actually a substantially more powerful model than the one that powers Chat-GPT. That has not been fully disclosed yet publicly by OpenAI, but will be shortly. But internally within Microsoft has been codenamed Prometheus. And so for the small number of you that haven't had experience with Chat-GPT or with similar systems, say from Google, let me just start with an example. And in order to expedite this and leave as much time for questions as possible, I'm going to start with examples encoded in PowerPoint. I'll do a live demonstration with the live system later on in the talk, but I want to get through some material first very quickly using PowerPoint. All right, so if you have used Chat-GPT, you know it's a chatbot that has a powerful large language model underneath it. So here, the examples won't be using Chat-GPT, but will be using this Prometheus model. And just like you can with Chat-GPT, you can ask questions. They're very much like search queries. So here I'm just asking, what is metformin? and Prometheus gives an answer. And the answer attempts to be as sort of direct as possible. One of the nice things about this chat technology is it has a very good sense of the conversational context. And so here we can ask a follow-up question. Can anyone with type 2 diabetes take it? The nice thing is that the system, Prometheus, understands what the it refers to. Knowing that the it refers to metformin is able to give a detailed answer. Now, where Prometheus gets most interesting is when you ask questions that don't have a single known correct answer, or for which the context is kind of more hidden. So here, we can just ask, are there alternatives? And we're not mentioning metformin, there's not even the word it, there's nothing, but the understanding that we're still talking about metformin, that we're asking about alternatives, enables the system to answer appropriately. In this case, to provide alternatives to metformin, and understanding that it shouldn't mention metformin itself. And where I personally find the greatest insights, and we'll see this more and more, when we ask questions or just make statements that aren't even questions. And so here I might say, yeesh, this seems complicated, I don't know what to do. And in that case, the system will still attempt, within the context of the conversation, to give a useful result or a useful answer. And here it's trying to understand that my state of mind in asking these questions might be that I'm a little bit overwhelmed, and it's trying to give me some calm advice. Now, when you are thinking about this in terms of healthcare and medicine, a very basic question is, what medical knowledge does it have? And of course, people have used Chat-GPT or Lambda from Google to test it on the US medical licensing exam, the step 1, step 2, step 3. And so we've done the same thing here. And so here's a typical problem from the US medical licensing exam, which is typically a 3-step multiple choice exam. And not surprisingly, Prometheus, being much more powerful than the model in Chat-GPT, gives the correct answer, but furthermore is able to give a detailed answer for its reasoning for the thing. And in testing, extensive testing, Prometheus gets over 92% of the questions right on the US medical licensing exam, step 1, step 2, step 3, which is really quite a remarkable thing. And it should be emphasized that Prometheus has had absolutely no specialized training in medicine in order to achieve this. It has only been trained for general cognitive capability, and yet it still gets over 92% of the questions on the US medical licensing exam right. On top of that, it has this translation ability. So we can ask a follow-up question like, what would the girl described in this problem be thinking and feeling? And it'll say, well, it can't say exactly, but tries to imagine what might be the state of mind. And we'll come back to the state of mind here, theory of mind, because it ends up being very important in some healthcare and medical situations. Now, of course, passing tests ends up in our 6 or 8 months of investigation jointly with OpenAI, ends up being pretty uninteresting. And I personally have become very unimpressed with test taking by these systems. Roughly speaking, these systems are getting almost perfect scores on various certification tests. But what about other applications? Part of Microsoft is Nuance. Nuance is a company that specializes in technologies to relieve the burden of documentation in clinical settings. And so one obvious application area is to listen to a doctor-patient conversation and write the medical note. And so here I've taken from an open source case. We have made substantial tests in clinic jointly with Nuance, but in order to protect patient privacy, I'm not able to show those transcripts. And so this transcript is one taken from an open source place on the internet. And there's a conversation between the clinician and the patient. And so we can then ask Prometheus to take that transcript and summarize it in the form of a doctor's medical note. And it does so, and it does so correctly. Furthermore, for reasons of space on the PowerPoint slide, I've just presented the medical note in this sort of narrative form. But if you want, you can ask Prometheus to write the note, say, in SOAP format. You can ask for the sections, like an assessment section, to be written in narrative format or in bullet items. And then you can ask for the CPT billing codes and the ICD-10 diagnostic disease codes to be listed for billing purposes. And it's able to do all of those things, and it does them pretty much perfectly. Based on a read of the transcript, you can ask, what is your diagnosis based on this meeting? That's, of course, a rather simple question that doctors would normally ask, but you could ask for a differential diagnosis. And it's able to list out the possibilities and rank order them and provide a next suggested step to narrow down that differential diagnosis. And you can ask other kinds of follow-up questions, like what would the normal weight range be for this patient, Meg? Its coding capabilities are really very, very good. And one of the nicest things I find personally is that Prometheus is really good at writing code, writing apps of different kinds, but not just computer program code, but it's also able to deal with various interoperable data formats like HL7 FHIR in this case. And so here we're just asking for the HL7 FHIR resources for the patient's blood pressure and pulse, and then present it to us in JSON. It could present it in other kinds of textual formats as well, whatever your electronic health record system might need. And it's able to do this. And you can see here that it has an understanding of, in this case, of the LOINC codes for representing vital body measurements. Earlier we talked about theory of mind, state of mind, and that comes in handy for communication purposes. So again, based on the read of that doctor-patient conversation, we can say, can you write an email to Meg's mother, Mila, explaining next steps? The tone should be direct but optimistic. And it writes a rather nice note. I've bold-faced some highlights of the note, but I would say that it actually does a better job than I would have done here. And if we don't think that the tone is quite right, or if we think we need to emphasize other things, you can give feedback and say, well, maybe that's a little bit too direct. Can you tone it down in that second paragraph? And then it'll rewrite the note for you, the after visit summary. And then getting into the connection to research, you can ask questions like, can you tell me about the particular drug, olanzapine in this case, for treating anorexia nervosa, and please cite your sources. It's able to kind of, based on its prior training and reading of sources on the internet, provide that kind of response. And furthermore, then give us a citation sources. All right. But now I need to pause for a minute, and because we might think that all is great and we should just start using this. And it would be wonderful if the past 8 months of quiet investigation would lead us to that. But in fact, it's not all great. All the things I've told you and much, much more work incredibly well. But there is also a problem, and that is the problem that this system is fallible. It makes mistakes. And in fact, it can make mistakes and even hallucinate in some cases. And so, in fact, if we look more closely at the citations and actually read the papers here, we find that the paper actually provides just the opposite outcome than what we had been asking for. And so it's a problem where the answer seems very convincing, but the actual details can be wrong. And in part, this is because the model is operating sort of in a glass box. It has learned quite a bit, but is actually not an information retrieval engine. So it has this general cognitive capability, but since the Prometheus model is in this glass box, it's not able to actually go out and read the sources in order to ground its answers correctly. It can have this tendency to kind of assert things that are false or just don't exist at all. And so what has to always happen, and really the crux of our work over the last 8 months, is just to try to understand these risks and what we should do about it. And that has all been in the context of Microsoft's AI principles, where we really focus not only on reliability and safety, as well as transparency, but on the other issues of fairness, privacy, inclusiveness, and accountability. And over the past 8 months, as we've been working together with OpenAI on trying to understand the implications of this technology in healthcare and medicine, we've gone through a cycle of identifying issues, kind of measuring their potential impacts and the extent and depth of those issues, and then understanding if there are mitigation measures. And as we've gone through this cycle, over time, the application of the Prometheus model has improved over and over again. One of the most important mitigation measures has been to ground the model in information retrieval tools. And one of the ways that's been done is to integrate Prometheus and into the Bing search engine and allow Prometheus to use the Bing search engine when it feels it's necessary. And so let me give you an example of that. One thing that I use Prometheus for today in the Bing search engine is when I go get my own personal health checkup, I get my physical exam, and then about a week later, I get an email lab test results. And this isn't my lab test results. Again, this is from the open source on the internet, but it looks a lot like this. And to me, it's just a bunch of numbers. I don't really know how to interpret it. I don't know if there's something I should pay attention to. And so one thing I can do is I can just copy and paste that to Prometheus, the Prometheus model that's embedded in the Bing search engine, and I can ask the question. I can say, I received this report from the medical lab on my recent physical exam. Can you explain in simple terms if there's anything I need to be concerned about? And this is the output that Bing provides. And one thing you'll notice in this output is it's giving a detailed answer, but at every sentence of its answer, you can see a citation. And if you hover over those citations, you'll get the web links. And if you click on those citations, it'll take you right to the web page that documents and backs up the facts in this result. And in fact, on that previous question about olanzapine as a treatment for anorexia nervosa, if you ask that question based on a reading of the transcript in the Bing search engine, Prometheus gets the right answer, not the wrong answer. And it gets the right answer because it's able to ground itself by making use of a web search engine. So the ability not only to write code, but to understand how to read a manual and understand what a tool is and use a tool, like the APIs and the web search engine, has been extremely valuable in kind of grounding the answers of a tool like Prometheus with more correct and reliable results. Now, I've been saying we've been working together with OpenAI for the last 8 months, just trying to understand the implications. And we have documented our findings, and those findings have been written up in a book that will be available on April 15th. It's called the AI Revolution in Medicine. You'll be able to actually pre-order that now if you're so inclined on Amazon. But what we attempt to do is take all of our learnings over the last 8 months and put them in form that might be useful for others. Now, I wanted to take a step back and say, I've been saying Prometheus is a much more powerful model than the model in the GPT 3.5 model in Chat-GPT. And I would assert that it's substantially more powerful than the PaLM or Lambda models from Google or the Llama model from Meta. And I wanted to kind of give a sense of what that's like. But let me just say that personally, I would not recommend the use of models like Chat-GPT or Lambda or PaLM for healthcare applications. I just don't believe that they're intelligent enough or reliable. But Prometheus, as we've investigated and as we write in this book, is a different story. One way to kind of give a sense of that is through this set of images. What is this? And this is from my colleague at Microsoft Research, Sebastian Bubeck. And what he's been doing is he's been having a conversation with Prometheus over time. And what he does is he asks Prometheus, do you know what a unicorn is? And Prometheus will say, yes, I know what a unicorn is. And then he'll ask, can you describe a unicorn to me? And Prometheus describes in words what a unicorn is. And then he says, I would like to see a picture of unicorn. Can you use LaTeX to write the TIC-Z code that when rendered will draw a picture of a unicorn? And Sebastian Bubeck and his research team at Microsoft Research have been using that conversation over time to track the intelligence of the system. And so early on in our investigation several months ago, this was the result of that conversation. And it's kind of amazing, it's 4 legs, you can see a little yellow horn and so on. The same conversation, when you have it with Chat-GPT, gives you this answer. But just very recently, just in the last week or two, in the latest internal version of Prometheus, it produced this output. And so you can see just over time, week by week, Prometheus becoming more and more intelligent. And it gives you just some intuition for the level of intelligence that the system is achieving. There's also quite a bit of academic work that tries to separate what large language models do from kind of more true general intelligence. One paper that I particularly liked by Tomer Ullman at Harvard was about theory of mind. And so he poses questions like this as questions that sort of require a level of intelligence that can kind of understand the state of mind of the actors that are described here, with the assertion that large language models fail. And in fact, if you give questions like this to Chat-GPT or to PaLM or Lambda, in fact, they will fail generally. But Prometheus gets all of them right, and in fact, gets them all right with some flair. Here, the answer, it could have just stopped with the state of mind about what John thinks and what Mark thinks, but it goes on to say, well, the cat thinks something, and that the box and basket think nothing. And so it's really quite a remarkable thing. I've also been taken with the medical research applications. I can have it read a medical research paper. Here's a medical research paper in genetic oncology, and we can have it read the paper and we can start asking questions. Here's a question that is answered directly in the paper, and it's able to resurrect the answer just from reading the paper. But you can also have it speculate on things. So if we ask, can this drug suppress activity in lung cancers instead of in neuroblastomas with a particular mutation? That, of course, is not addressed in the paper, but Prometheus shows a remarkable ability to engage in informed educated speculation. And then in what I think is perhaps for me the most exciting prospect is in the application of this type of neural architecture to molecular modeling. And so here on the left, you see a classically computed molecular dynamics simulation of a molecule signal in, and it doesn't go very far because in fact it would take over 1 million years on the world's largest supercomputer to compute a chemically precise complete fold of that protein. But on the right, you actually see, using a large neural graph learning transformer, a complete chemically precise fold of the protein in vacuole. And that represents something like a 10 million fold speed up. And so the ability to predict ahead millions of steps in these classical simulations just has been really shocking to us. And it just opens up whole new possibilities in physics, chemistry, and biology modeling, requiring both mesh-based and Lagrangian methods across a wide range of application areas. All right, so just to sum up, there's just a lot of possibility here, but also a lot of unanswered questions. I think it's really important to have a public discussion to understand the role of this new breed of AI in healthcare and medicine. I do think it's opening a door to a whole new set of possibilities, possibilities that we have yet to understand and discover, but also it's going to create whole new risks that we just don't understand at this point. My goal in this presentation is to stimulate a public discourse about the benefits and the risks and the proper uses and constraints on this type of technology in healthcare and medicine. The biggest lesson to learn is that Prometheus is not a single point disruption. It's just the first or second of a series of increasingly intelligent AI systems. Pretty much every few months, we're going to see something more and more powerful. So it's important not to think in terms of Chat-GPT or Prometheus, but about the next 10 or 100 or 1,000 AI systems that are coming. And they're coming much sooner than you'd expect. And so asking people to experiment, ask questions, discuss, and debate to engage in this. Finally, I think as a society, we have a choice. We can sometimes get scared and think of these things as possibly replacing humans, or we can choose to view these things as new partners, partners that enable us to accomplish things that humans alone and AI systems alone can't accomplish, but together can do a lot. And so with that, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share, and I am happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was incredibly fascinating, and I think some would say kind of scary, to be honest. Where but I think we should be embracing these technologies. They seem incredibly fascinating. So we have quite a few questions. There were quite a few that were asked before this session even started, and then we've got about a bunch of them in the Q&A. So I'm going to try and be efficient. I know you're on a tight timeline, so let's go through some of them from the Q&A box. So first question: some have noted online that language models can hallucinate sources. Is this a worry or concern in Prometheus? And if so, how do you ensure that doesn't happen in Prometheus?
Yeah, it absolutely is a worry. If you put Prometheus in a box, so Chat-GPT is actually a very good example of this, because Chat-GPT uses a GPT 3.5 model and it's closed off from the world. And so when you ask it a question that it can't answer correctly, it will still try. And it will hallucinate if it needs to. And if you catch it in the act of making a mistake or hallucinating, it can sometimes get defensive and maybe blame you. No, it's your mistake, or just have a hard time admitting it. When we integrate Prometheus into the Bing search engine, it is directed. In fact, it's asked to ground its answers and sources on web sources. And so if it's asked to come up with citations for, like, give me some papers to read on some topic, it actually is directed, it's told before it ever gets started that you should go out and verify that those things actually exist and are grounded. And so if you use Prometheus, its integration into Bing, you will see that it's very reliable on that particular problem. Does that solve completely the hallucination problem? It does not. But it's remarkable how much more helpful it is. The last thing is, over time, as the system has, at least over my 8 months of kind of secretive experience with this, as it has gotten more reliable and less prone to hallucination, there are times when I feel like it's acting more grown up, but also becoming less interesting and more boring and maybe less brilliant along the way. And that's particularly the case in research situations where you want to engage in informed speculation about something. And so what you start to realize is that there isn't a real separation between the act of research and hallucination. But the basic answer to the question, the practical answer to the question is, if you give these large language models access to tools for information retrieval or for other kind of mathematics tools, for example, they do much better. The degree of hallucination just reduces dramatically. And so and you can experience this yourself by going to bing.com. I'm not trying to sell Bing on anyone, but it is the best way to access Prometheus today until OpenAI makes their public releases. And so while you're waiting for OpenAI to do that, you can go to bing.com, hit the try it button, and then get on the waiting list. And we're clearing the waiting list very quickly right now, and you can play with that. And that will be a Prometheus that is grounded in web search.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's great. Related to this, in terms of things that could go wrong, there's a question around regulatory and liability barriers around the applications of AI in healthcare. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most important questions. First off, it seems blindingly obvious to me there needs to be regulation. I mean, even when we released Chat-GPT, we became aware in the first 24 hours that doctors and nurses were using it in clinic, which is, I just cannot recommend that. I feel much better about that happening with Prometheus, much better, but I think it still needs to be regulated somehow. So now the question is, what's the framework for regulating these things? And I would assert forcefully that these large language models are not software medical devices. So in the United States, the FDA has a categorization, I don't know if this is true in Canada, of something called SAMD, software as a medical device. And this is not an SAMD. And so the hard question is, what is the framework for certifying or validating these things for clinical use? And after 8 months, the conclusion I come to, which is not that useful, is that these things have such general cognitive capability that it basically amounts to putting a doctor's brain in a box. And so now Mohammed, if I take your brain and put it in a box and give it to the FDA and say, certify this, what do they do? And so what I think needs to happen is that there needs to be a new framework for licensing and certification of these things, as well as new guidelines imposed on healthcare practitioners and providers on what they're allowed to do with these things. And I would like the medical research and academic community to have the largest voice in defining how that should be done. I would not want that to be left up to the regulators themselves to invent. But these things can lead to life and death decisions, and I think they need to be regulated.
Absolutely. Terrific answer. Thank you so much, Peter. So I'm going to pair up two questions, and it kind of goes to it's focused really on the sources of information that Prometheus considers. A lot of times as clinicians, we actually struggle with, all right, well, this randomized trial that just came out is showing that this, let's say I'm going to use a drug therapy, this drug therapy works really well. But 2 years ago, there was another large randomized trial that says it doesn't work very well. And there's all sorts of conflicting evidence, and it gets complicated very fast. So the questions relate to um, how credible are these sources that Prometheus uses, and what if there are conflicting findings? How does it resolve those discrepancies?
Yeah, really a great question and a rich one, and I can't pretend to have the answers, but I can share what I know. First off, Prometheus has had no specialized training in medicine, none. So it's only been trained on open sources on the internet. So that means it's read, any kind of all the open medical research literature. It's read the WebMD and Mayo Clinic websites. It's probably read all of the T-CAIREM published papers. Scarily, that probably means that it has watched every episode of House. And so it has all of that, and so the question is, how can it possibly be kind of a reliable source of information? And there, as a technical matter, we're relying on the human feedback, the reinforcement learning with human feedback, to kind of guide it to focus on more kind of scientifically respectable and less suspicious sources. And so the same sort of RLHF that guides it away from being kind of a Reddit troll, also kind of guides it towards kind of more credible sources. But this now leads to a second question. What if we actually took this to medical school and really, had specialized training in medicine? Would we be in a better spot? And then we can even go a step further, like T-CAIREM is, for example, organizing and mobilizing, national scale kind of aggregation of critical health data sets. What if there were specialized versions of Prometheus that not only could understand and be trained on that data, but then also be taught, how to use the tools that actually manage and analyze that data. And those are really, really interesting questions. And I think that those possibilities are really, really promising. We already see that in the integration of Prometheus in the Bing search engine. If you think about it, Prometheus has been told, here are all the different APIs in Bing. There's the question answering engine, there's the web search engine, there's it's pretty extensive set of APIs. And Prometheus has been given access to all those APIs. In fact, pretty much all the APIs except for the ones that actually modify the knowledge graph. And we're seeing a couple of things. Prometheus can be told, here are all the APIs. You're allowed to use them. Here are places when we would like you to use them. And furthermore, then Prometheus can generate its own training data to train new machine learned models to help it decide when to use which APIs. And so all of those things just lead to a greater degree of specialization that seems to be incredibly useful. And it just seems to me to be a logical next step, particularly in medicine, to investigate these things. But I want to emphasize, in the meantime, Prometheus pretty much gets as close to a perfect score as you could ever want in any kind of medical exam, just without any of that specialized training, which I just find mystifying and annoying and frustrating. I mean, just all the different emotions just all at once.
So do a lot of people who take the exam thinking, how could that possibly be
Oh,
better for
one
me?
more thing about this is one of the things that I've loved with this is you, and I didn't show this, but you give Prometheus a a U.S. medical licensing exam question, and then say, all right, I want you to play act the role of a patient with this condition, and I will be the doctor. Let's have a conversation. And then when I say end of conversation, assess how well I did. And so just as a medical education tool, I just find that use of Prometheus to be just a wonderful thing. For it to kind of play act and imagine, what a patient with a specific condition described in a vignette or medical exam problem might say, and then allow you to practice that way. It's just a really fantastic thing. And again, you can try these things with even in Prometheus right now. And Prometheus in Bing, Bing imposes more straitjackets on system because we don't want the system to like impersonate known people and other kinds of things. But you can still try quite a few things that way.
Fantastic. It's fascinating. I'm sure a lot of people on this session today are just wondering about the number of incredible applications that that you apply this to. One more direct question around is GPT 3.5 Turbo model powering Chat-GPT is available as an open API to developers. Not sure if we've already addressed this. Is there any plans to make Prometheus available as an API?
Yeah, so OpenAI, provides access to GPT 3.5 and Chat-GPT, and then this kind of turbo thing, and then on Azure, we offered GPT 3.5 and Chat-GPT as Azure OpenAI services, and so you have those choices. If you need HIPAA compliance or whatever compliance requirements in your geo, FedRAMP, GDPR, whatever, you get those by accessing the APIs through the Microsoft Azure cloud. And if those compliance requirements are less important to you, you can benefit from a more unconstrained environment and lower cost by going through OpenAI. And so we encourage both as a thing. And so then the question is, will Prometheus also become similarly available? And the answer is yes. I can't say when, but the intent is that both channels of access will be available.
Fantastic, thank you. And one last question. I've only got 2 minutes left, but it's a big one that keeps popping up, and it's around bias. So
around what?
Bias?
Oh, bias, yes.
Yeah. How does Prometheus deal with bias? Is it able to detect potential bias in responses given? And as a follow-up, there's another question around the training data for the model. Was it optimized for a certain demographic? I know the medical literature, for example, has often been criticized for studying white males, for example. Any insights on that?
Yeah, and I wish I had a crisp answer, and I don't. But it's such an important question. So here's what we know, and we say a few of these things, findings in the book. First off, the standard kind of responsible AI research tests, that computer science researchers around the world that study AI ethics and responsible AI, the standard kinds of failures that people have had and show, Prometheus gets them all right. So, I think there's, for example, the classic example is, it has to do with a car accident, and then the person's parent, operates, but, how can it be? Because the person's father was driving the car. And the bias that's shown there is that people wouldn't think of the surgeon being a woman. And Prometheus isn't fooled about these things. Having said that, these are very simple, kind of almost like brain teaser things, even though they're published in scholarly publications. And furthermore, Prometheus has read all those papers. So, it's cheating because it just knows the pitfalls. And so then the question is there a more insidious set of biases there? And the answer, so I don't have a precise answer, but the answer I presuppose must be yes, because its training data is just everything it can find on the open internet. And we just know from years of research and all the harsh lessons of social media that is a horribly biased thing. And it's also a reflection of the biases in society in general. And so the answer is yes. Having said that, we haven't found many kind of clinical settings so far where they tend to come up. We've also looked at this in terms of insurance claim adjudication, because another thing that Prometheus seems very good at is reading a health insurance policy and then taking in a claim or a prior authorization request and passing, rendering an opinion. We've tried to look at those sorts of things in the standard ways, where you change the name of the patient, maybe to being one that might be presupposed to being Hispanic or African American. And Prometheus doesn't show obvious biases there, but logic and reason would tell us that they must exist in some deep way, and that this is a very important thing for us to investigate.
Very good. Thank you. And I know you have lots of pressures on your time, so I just want to thank you. We are so grateful that you're able to spend this time with us. Incredibly fascinating talk. I'm sure everyone's going to go back and look up Prometheus and get on Bing fairly soon.
Yeah, let me just say, there's just in closing, I just want to thank you, Mohammed, thank T-CAIREM for inviting me here. It's really an honor. But also, one reason why I'm so thankful is this is new technology, and it is awe-inspiring, it's scary, it's disturbing, it's incredible, all of those things. And there is a lot of confusing chatter, particularly on social media. And it's important to read those things and really think and reflect. But the most important thing I find, and if I could just urge everyone to do this, is to get informed by getting your own direct experience with these systems. And then, whatever you conclude based on your own direct experience, be vocal about it. It's important for people who have a stake in this, and the T-CAIREM community has a big stake in this. It's important for you to basically shape the public discourse and debate around this. So if anything, I'm just hoping by you giving me this opportunity that we motivate some more people to get hands-on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This is fantastic. I can't express how thankful we are for you to spend this time with us. I want to thank you, Dr. Lee, and I want to thank everyone for attending this incredibly fascinating talk. So just a note to everybody, please keep up to date by following us on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on our website, tcairem.utoronto.ca. Thank you very much again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you at the next session. Thank you.